The stagecoach rattled down the last stretch of road, its wheels shrieking against stone and dust flying in great, choking clouds. Horses foamed at the mouth, their eyes rolling white as the driver cracked his whip. Folks along the boardwalk of Red Hollow lifted their heads, boots scuffing wood. Cards left forgotten on a saloon table. Jedediah Cole stood at the hitching post, hat brim low, calloused hands locked against the post as though bracing himself. The wire from Kansas had been plain enough. A woman on her way, willing and common. That was what he needed. Nothing more. A partner for the work. Someone who wouldn't mind the silence of cattle country. The coach clattered to a halt in a storm of dust. A moment hung, hot and breathless. Then the door swung open. A figure stepped down. The town fell silent. Even the horses stamped uneasily as if aware something unexpected had just touched the earth. She was no common bride. Her boots met the dirt with a grace that didn't belong to Red Hollow. A traveling dress of deep blue caught the sunlight, turning every grain of dust around her into shimmer. Golden hair slid loose from its pins, tumbling against her shoulders like a thing wild and alive. Her face, too perfect, too striking, made even the hardest drifter pause in stride. A murmur rippled along the saloon's porch. Men shifted in their chairs. One whistled low, another spat, muttering, "What's a woman like that doing here?" Jed's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected this. He couldn't have. This wasn't the kind of woman who belonged on his ranch, nor in his life. Her eyes searched, steady and unafraid. They landed on him. Jed felt the heat rise under his collar. Dust clung to his shirt. Sweat ran down his spine. He dressed as decent as he could, but beside her he felt like nothing but sun-bleached hide and weathered bone. The sheriff leaned on the post outside the saloon, watching, a dealer's laugh still behind him. The blacksmith's hammer froze mid-swing. She walked forward, each step sure as though she owned the very ground. "Mr. Cole?" Her voice carried, smooth but with a weight beneath it, like a river running under stone. Jed nodded once. He couldn't manage more. Behind him, a pair of ranch hands whispered, their voices sharp, "She don't belong out here. Looks like trouble, if you ask me." The sun dropped lower, turning the sky red, and the wind dragged heat across the street. Jed stood rooted as if nailed to the earth, the whole town staring. This was no common bride, and the weight of her arrival pressed against Red Hollow like a storm rolling in from the desert. The wind whipped hard across the prairie, snapping the wash line until shirts and skirts cracked like gunfire. Evangeline gripped the line with one hand, steady as stone, while the storm of grit bit at her cheeks. Jed watched in the corral, shovel paused in his palm, struck again by how she faced the land like she'd faced the street in Red Hollow, unflinching. The cattle lowed restlessly. A fence post groaned under strain. Jed's shoulders burned from digging, but his eyes kept dragging back to her. She wasn't the kind of woman to bend, not to the wind, not to the dust, not to him. Nightfall came heavy. Coyotes yipped on the ridgeline, their cries sharp as knives. Jed dropped into the chair by the hearth, boots worn, sweat, and dirt still clinging. Across from him, Evangeline worked a needle through canvas, her fingers sure, the firelight catching on her profile. The stitch work, too quick, too practiced. Not the clumsy mending of a housewife, but the clean, efficient cuts of someone used to precision. Jed leaned forward, studying. "You've done this before," he muttered. She didn't look up. "Everyone's done mending." Jed frowned, but said nothing more. Outside, the prairie groaned under the weight of night. Somewhere far off, a rider's hoofbeats echoed faint across stone. Jed stiffened, listening. The sound died, swallowed by the dark. At dawn, whispers followed them into town. Folks leaned close in the mercantile, muttering of the crow's talons moving north. Stagecoaches burned, bodies left cooling in the dust. The sheriff's jaw stayed clenched, hand on his belt, eyes restless as a hawk. Evangeline walked to the murmurs untouched, her face unreadable, every step silent but commanding. Children gawked, mothers pulled them close. Men stole, looks they didn't dare hold long. By the saloon, a stranger waited. Scar slashed down his cheek, like a brand from another life. He leaned against a rail, smoke curling from a cigar, eyes following her every move. Jed saw it. He felt it. The way the man stared wasn't the look of desire, but of recognition. That night, Jed found Evangeline on the porch. Lantern glows soft against her dress. Gaze fixed on the horizon where the mesas rose black against the stars. Her hands rested in her lap, still as stone, but her shoulders carried weight. You running from something? Jed asked, voice low. Her eyes slid to his, sharp and tired, yet burning with something he couldn't name. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The silence stretched, filled only by the rasp of crickets. When she finally spoke, it was barely more than a whisper. Not running, waiting. The night swallowed the words, leaving Jed with nothing but the sound of the wind and the sense that the past had already found them. The first torch shattered against the sheriff's office, flames leaping wild into the night. Gunfire cracked after it, sharp and sudden, sending townsfolk screaming through the streets. Horses reared in panic, hooves pounding, as the crow's talons swept into Red Hollow like a storm of fire and iron. Jed fired once from the porch rail, the recoil hammering his shoulder. A rider fell, boots dragging in the dust, but 3 more surged past, whooping, rifles raised high. The ranch house shook under the gunfire, windows splintering, glass raining across the floor. Inside, Evangeline stood in the lamplight, eyes cold, hands steady. She pulled a revolver from the trunk at the foot of the bed, an iron polished by years, grips worn smooth by use. Not the gun of a farmer's bride. She spun the cylinder, slid it shut with a click that cut through the chaos. Stay down, Jed barked, shoving a table against the door, but she didn't stay down. She stepped past him, skirts brushing the floor, revolver drawn low at her side. Outside, shadows move in the firelight, men shouting, boots pounding, steel striking against shutters. Jed raised his rifle, but before he could fire, Evangeline was already in the doorway, her voice sharp as a blade. Move! He ducked. Her pistol spoke, 3 times in the span of a breath. When Jed lifted his head, 3 men lay sprawled in the dirt, torches guttering beside them. The gang cursed, some pulling back, others charging harder. Jed stared, chest heaving. You... No time. She snapped, eyes never leaving the dark street. The night burned hotter. The gang regrouped, their leader, scarred face glinting in the firelight. Riding forward, rifle raised high. His voice boomed above the din. Thought you could hide, widow? Thought we wouldn't find you. Widow. The word cut sharp. Jed turned to her, searching her face, but Evangeline didn't flinch. She leveled her pistol at the scarred man, jaw set like stone. They murdered him, she said, her voice low, fierce. My husband, sheriff of Abilene. They took him from me, and I swore they'd pay. Her words burned like iron in Jed's chest. The scarred leader laughed, cruel and hollow, and the gang roared with him. They spread wide, circling, rifles glinting. Jed lifted his rifle again, feeling the weight of it heavier than ever before. But Evangeline, she moved with the certainty of someone forward for this moment. Every shot she fired struck true, every step measured, controlled. Together they pulled the wounded into cover, drove back charge after charge, smoke choking the air, blood soaking into the dust. The town clung to life only because of them. And as the flames climbed higher, Jed knew the truth. The woman he thought too fine for his world was the only one fierce enough to save it. The dawn cracked blood-red over the mesas, spilling light across the battlefield. Smoke still clung to the street, acrid and heavy, mixing with the stink of gunpowder. The crow's talons stood restless, circling like wolves. Their scarred leader sat tall in the saddle, rifle gleaming in the rising sun. Jed and Evangeline walked out together, boots crunching over broken glass and spent shells. The town watched from shadows. Faces pale, children clutching mothers' skirts, men gripping tools that felt useless against what loomed. The leader spat, grinning wide. You should have stayed hidden, widow. Ain't no sheriff to protect you now. Evangeline stepped forward, pistol steady at her side, eyes hard as flint. I don't need a sheriff. Her voice carried, cutting through the silence. The scarred man laughed once, then raised his hand. The gang surged. Gunfire split the morning. Jed's rifle cracked, dropping a rider clean from the saddle. Evangeline moved like a flame through smoke, swift, precise, unyielding. Her revolver barked again and again, each shot landing true. Dust kicked up around her boots. Bullets splintered wood at her back. But she never faltered. Jed reloaded, hand shaking, but his aim held steady. A bullet grazed his arm, hot iron burning flesh. Yet he stood tall, firing, shielding the townsfolk huddled behind the troughs and fences. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of purpose heavier than the loneliness he'd carried. The fight funneled toward the square. One by one, the gang fell or fled, until only the scarred leader remained. He dismounted slow, knife flashing in the light, rifle slung across his back. His boots thudded heavy on the dirt as he closed the distance. Evangeline stepped to meet him. They circled, dust swirling at their feet, the town holding its breath. His knife slashed, catching her sleeve, tearing fabric. She answered with steel of her own, a hidden blade pulled quick as lightning. Sparks flew as metal struck metal, their fight raw, close, brutal. The man snarled, driving her back, but she twisted, driving her blade deep into his side. His howl shook the air. Still, he lunged, fingers clawing at her throat. Jed fired once. The shot ripped through the silence, tearing him off her. The scarred leader staggered, choking, then collapsed face first into the dust. The desert wind carried his last breath away. The street fell still. Smoke drifted. Horses whined, restless. Then, slowly, the townsfolk stepped out, eyes wide, faces filled with awe. Evangeline stood, bloody but unbroken, chest rising with steady breath. Jed lowered his rifle, arm trembling, but his eyes never left her. An old voice carries it still. How a rancher thought himself unworthy, how a woman too fine for dust and cattle came on a stagecoach, and how together they burned their legend into Red Hollow.